All right, we'll get things going. Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual design panel meeting, design review panel meeting. Today, our agenda is the proposed development at 325 James Street North in Hamilton. I am Edward Winter, urban designer with the City of Hamilton and hosting this meeting. We also have David Cluzio chairing this meeting. In addition to our panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and media observing today. Members of the public are welcome here to observe, but are reminded there's no questions or comments from the public at this time. This meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the City of Hamilton's DRP webpage. Lastly, reminder to panelists to please keep your microphones muted when not speaking. Thank you everyone for attending our design review panel. David, please begin the meeting when you're ready.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Edward, can you please confirm that this session is being recorded?
Yes, I confirm we are recording.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
No, there aren't.
Okay, I'll take it by silence that there are no conflict of interest issues with any of the panelists. So on the agenda today is the review of 325 Jane Street North. The lead planner in the file is Joe Bortoloni, who is available to answer any policy questions, and Edward Winter will make a brief presentation. Good afternoon, Edward. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation under 5 minutes.
Sorry, I just saw an email pop up from James. Address that first.
If I could figure it out, anybody could figure it out. So James has no excuse. He's there.
Zian?
I love technology.
All right. Okay, let's get back to it. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, James, for bearing with us. Okay. Today we have 325 James Street North, a mixed-use building, 12 stories with an adaptive reuse of an existing 3-story building. The ground floor is designed for commercial, while the remaining floors will consist of 136 residential units. Here we're seeing the subject lands at the corner of Barton Street and James Street North. Looking from the southwest at the existing building central and the 3-story to be retained on the right. Then looking from the north, looking south along James Street. Conceptual site plan showing the commercial space in this light pink color. Subject lands are within the downtown mixed use with a pedestrian focus noted along James Street. And for a low rise too in terms of building height. So today our questions for discussion are, does the proposal complement the surrounding through building design and the placement and the provision of pedestrian amenities promoting a vibrant streetscape and sidewalk along both James Street North and Barton Street? Does the proposal make a sensitive transition in height to the surrounding built environment? And lastly, does the proposal exercise sensitivity to the heritage building on the north? Stop sharing and hand it back over to you, David.
We're ready for the consultant to provide additional information. Please keep your presentation to under 10 minutes.
Thank you. I have my timer on, so hopefully I'll get it pretty close. Can I share my screen? Can that work?
I think so.
Yes, you can. See it. Thank you.
Okay, can you see it? Can everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, as Edward gave a brief introduction, this is a 12-story building with the street level commercial, residential underground parking, and some at-grade parking. Just as a bit of a background, Core Urban, I've been lucky to work with Core Urban on several different projects downtown. Core Urban's motto is develop different, and they do. They're very interested in heritage and making buildings fit into the context. More interested in that than they are in height and yield, that sort of thing. So they're very progressive that way. And these are some current buildings under construction on the Augusta site. So I'll very briefly, the site is at the corner of James and Barton. It's an interesting site because the road does bend here, and I think this had to do with the way the surveying was done in years ago with the stretching of the chains. Anyways, that's what the myth is. Some context photos. Generally speaking, it's fairly mixed, and I think it's fair to say that there's no real consistent character on James North at this point. It's much more consistent further south where we have the Heritage Character District. Brief description of the site. The proposed concept retains 325 James North, the building to the north, and proposes a 12-story tower to act as an anchor on the corner of James and Barton. The proposed development responds positively to the Urban Hamilton official plan, which permits additional height, and these site plan guidelines and the zoning bylaw, and that we are conforming to the requirements for parking and setbacks, those sorts of things. I'm going to jump to the landscape plan right now. Normally the landscape plan comes at the end after the building is explained, but we think that the streetscape is so integral and important to this project that we've moved it ahead in the presentation. So I'll ask Mario, landscape architect, to do a bit of a presentation on the landscape streetscape design.
Thanks, Rick. I'll keep it fairly brief, but we did want to sort of mention that the intention here was to build upon some of that unique character that exists on James Street North a little bit further to the south. The idea is to stretch that north into this site and pay homage to the the historic character of some of the buildings while tying in with the new build. So the landscape is really divided up into 3 zones. The area that you see in here on the sort of reddish brown tone, which is sort of an upgraded paving treatment along the building, which we consider sort of a commercial retail zone along the frontage, James Street North and Barton Street. Now, and then that's complemented with the extending the city's urban braille sidewalk treatment, which gives that clear path of travel, and the urban braille textured banding and the sidewalk markers. And then the 3rd zone is really the boulevard, which is treated as the street tree and furnishing zone. So there we'll have, again, match the City of Hamilton standard in terms of paving treatment, accommodate for existing and proposed street trees, tree grades, and some site furnishings. So you can see what's up on this, or sorry, Rick, can you go back one
Yep.
for me?
Yep.
I'll just touch on the treatment along the building. The pedestrian space is really, this is sort of an enhanced paving treatment meant to complement the architecture, but also allow for that commercial retail zone, which will allow for a little bit of spillover space or spill out space, which could potentially accommodate some seating, enhanced planting, and maybe some retail uses. And then as it wraps around the corner on Barton, the space there's a little more generous and obviously accommodate the larger sort of patio seating that would conform to the city of Hamilton's sort of street patio guidelines. And the intention is to sort of really create this vibrant streetscape that really does extend that character from further south. We move on to the, I think the only other thing I'll say, Rick, is if you want to go to the cross sections, yeah, here, so you can sort of see all of these two cross sections sort of highlight that, you know, the balance between the retail commercial zone, the clear path of travel, and the street trees slash furnishing zone. I think I'll pass it back to Rick.
Thanks, Mario. The precedents for the design, the first precedent we took is based upon our own project on King William Street, Templar Flats, sort of showing the integration of the old with the new. That sort of interesting kind of combination. The base of the building kind of takes inspiration from the Firth building on Houston Street North. It's an industrial type building, quite elegant, quite simple, but quite finely detailed. So we're looking for the same, or like a quite finely detailed 4-story base. And this other precedent is a building in Toronto, which clearly identifies the base as a different element from the tower. These are just some diagrams saying how the concept was developed. Starting with the developable site area. The maximum building envelope permitted by zoning is this 7-story block. The UHOB permits additional height based upon certain criteria being fulfilled. The desire to extend to retain the existing building, and then what that does is it reduces the footprint of the new building, which increases provides a bit more of a transition and reduces the impact of shadowing and things to the north. The tower footprint from the west side, which is adjacent to the residential section of Barton Street West. Sorry. Sorry, I should have had a 20-something here helping me. Boy. Can I get somebody to help me here? I need to get the next slide here. What's that? I'll go down more. Want to go down further? Further slide further down here in this presentation. The next slide. No. Where do I get the next one? Yeah. Yeah, how do I get out of it? How do I stay in, how do I get to the next slide? Apologies. I have to do it this way, maybe. Okay, my apologies. I'm not sure if I still have it yet, but this slide shows the street level entrances. And then the grade level plan, which shows what happens at grade. We have the built form fronting onto James and Barton, and surface parking in this zone, and then ramp down to 2 levels of underground parking. We have the podium level that's articulated. And then the tower level is also articulated with emphasis on the corner of James and Barton. Okay. Okay. The ground and site plan, as Edward showed before, we have the entrance, the individual storefront entrances to small commercial spaces, residential entrance on James, vehicular entrance on Barton, 1 level of underground parking, and then this is repeated. The 2nd to 4th floor plan, which are the larger units that form the podium, and then the 5th floor units, which are shallower but benefit by the terrace, and then the even and odd floors, the 6th to 12th, which are similar, but the glazing is alternating in terms of where the openings are. This is the cross section showing the podium, 15.3 meters and a total height of 44.7, with the step backs of 3 meters. The east and south elevation showing the integration of the more traditional base with the modern tower, and the integration with the glass, tying the 2 together. The west and north elevations. This faces the residential to the west. Aerial perspective. Another aerial perspective. This is the view looking up James Street from the north. The views from the more residential area on Barton Street, and the softer kind of approach with the horizontal extended balcony rails. Sun shadow, we've done as of right, which is a 7-story, and the proposed, which does have a taller, they're 2 different kinds of shadows. The 7-story as of right is wider but shorter. The taller building is longer shadows but narrower, so the impact is at right close to the right beside the existing building is actually less with the taller building. The some thoughts about the material palette: brick and precast concrete with composite aluminum panels. We're still looking at the materials. This is an alternate material selection with the black composite versus the bronze. And then these are some another discussion of the alternate material palette with the black composite versus the bronze. I
Okay,
think I'm going to stop there. Sorry it took so long, and I needed a 20-something here to help me, but
okay, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists for questions. First, Ted, do you have any questions?
Yes. Can you describe if there are any sustainable ambitions being considered for this project?
we are starting to consider that. We're looking at possibly low carbon concrete. All the appliances would be Energy Star. We're considering geothermal, but that may require an extra additional excavation, which may not be practical. The buildings would have operable all the units would have operable windows. Highly reflective materials. And we're looking at some low water use features. And in terms of the health benefits, I probably did not mention that we do have in terms of mental health and sort of well-being, we do have the top floor, which would be an amenity floor, which could have some gym equipment and some outdoor amenity area with views to the bay and the escarpment.
Great, thanks. And that actually leads into my next question: is the intent to develop the rooftop for use, and are there plans to do that so that that entire space could be usable by the tenants?
Yes, we've just started to talk to Mario about that. We're not sure if it would be more of a hard surface or if we could actually get a bit of green roof happening up there. But it is a fairly large area with some pretty nice views of the city. So there's some real opportunities to develop that rooftop amenity area.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Jennifer Sison?
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. So I've got a couple of questions. One's just a clarification. The upper level step back distance after the kind of podium you've shown, what is that distance?
It's 3 meters on James and Barton.
Thank you. And I noticed in your proposal, you're showing kind of the northwest corner as uncovered surface parking. Was there a reason that that area you thought was better served for surface parking, that it wasn't contemplated for building space?
The northwest area actually is surface parking. Just in terms of the footprint, the usable footprint of a multi-unit building, it didn't seem to lend itself to that. So, and it seemed like a pretty small area to put more building in.
Okay. Was there any consideration given to using it as something other than parking? I know that's what is existing, but like amenity spaces?
Well, we're hoping to accomplish the amenity space on the roof. It may be possible. We could look at putting a roof over the parking and using that as well. That's something to consider. But we hadn't really considered it. I think Steve, maybe you and I can talk about that and see if that might be some value in that.
And my last question was, if there was a wind, I just didn't see one. What is it? Sorry, was there a wind study completed?
No, that's, I believe, a requirement of the site plan agreement. We just went to DRT last week, and I believe that was identified as a requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joey?
Thanks, David. I have a few questions. A cultural heritage impact assessment wasn't provided as part of the submission, but I understand it is being developed. Without a conservation strategy in place to respond to, I'm just wondering how this design was developed. And maybe I'll add to that what hasn't been spoken about is the removal of the former International Hotel, which is a pretty significant heritage building. So how, again, like, why was the decision made to remove that building without a conservation strategy in place?
There is a requirement for a chia, which will be undertaken. That was highlighted at our DRT last week. Just in terms of what seems like a big site is really not a big site if that building is maintained. The thing is, there is this requirement for parking on site. We've achieved it through 2 levels of underground parking, but to do that, we'd had to remove that existing building. And it seems that it's, from what we understand, it seems to be more important from a heritage value in terms of its use and its history rather than its architectural character. But because it has been changed over the years, but we're hoping that chia will help clarify some of that for us.
Okay. And will a document and salvage report form part of the future submission?
Yes, I imagine it will. Terms of reference haven't been written up yet, but there's a possibility that we would maybe maintain like a historical name associated with the property. Typically, Core Urban does that. They'll look back to the history of a property, and they'll name it after that certain entity. Witten Lofts, it was named after the architect who designed it. Templar Flats, there used to be a hall, a meeting hall on the site for Templar. I believe that was a club. So there's probably going to be an interest in carrying that name through on this project. And certainly if there's anything that's of heritage salvage value, we can incorporate it into the interior of the development.
Okay. Well, that may also come out in the document itself. Yeah, in that report. Were there requirements for an angular plane?
If I may, Rick, I think I could maybe assist. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Good afternoon. My name is James Webb. I'm the planning consultant that's working with Steve and Rick on the project. To just for the sake of some context in terms of where we're at in the process. I mean, this is still very early days. We've made a submission for pre-consultation to city staff that happened a couple of weeks ago. We've had follow-up discussions with heritage staff, and some of those questions you've raised are spot on with the discussions we're having with them. But again, I appreciate that we're very early in the process. You know, we really did want to come before DRP to present some of the massing ideas and the proposal in terms of retention and redevelopment of portions. But there is quite clear guidelines of the downtown secondary plan. So a lot of the questions about studies are all matters that are actually going to be required of us in order to advance the application. So we've done a pre-consultation phase. We've developed the scheme for the purposes of that initial review. And just, you know, for the information of committee, the downtown secondary plan is very clear. If you wish to increase the height beyond what's currently permitted, the minimum list of studies that need to be submitted include shadow impact study, pedestrian wind impact studies, visual impact assessment, obviously taking into consideration views either towards the harbor or views to the escarpment, transportation studies, infrastructure, cultural heritage is a fundamental element, not just in the secondary plan, but there's zoning on all the lands in the downtown that require satisfactory completion of chia to the satisfaction of city staff before that H can come off. Urban design brief, which would also allow as a layer that transitional building height evaluation you just referenced, and lastly, planning justification. So there is a framework now in terms of the studies that are expected of us, and certainly the feedback from the committee is going to help inform any further, more detailed evaluations that are deemed to be necessary to allow a more fulsome review of this once we're into a formal planning process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rick and James.
Joey, do you have any other questions? Is
No,
there somebody
I
from
don't.
is there somebody from the city that can actually answer the question that you specifically asked about the angular plane?
Joe?
Joe here. Yep. Yeah, like James mentioned, it will be included in further studies that will have to be submitted in future applications, including the urban design brief and visual impact assessment. So that review will get done. It's just forthcoming as they move through the process.
Thank you.
Jennifer Mallard?
Thanks, David, and thanks, James. My question actually was, what are the trigger points for the site to get the added density as of the Hamilton official plan? So thank you for answering that. It's for us, we usually see a lot of the results of those studies when we review a project, the angular plane study, the wind study, heritage study. So it puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage not to have that information to review. That's my only question, which is more of a comment.
Eldon?
Thank you. Only one question. My other questions have been answered. And I'm pretty sure this was not raised, but I wanted confirmation on the setback to the west above the 5th floor.
It is I believe it's around 2 meters to the edge of the balcony and 4.5 meters to the face of the glass wall, approximately.
Are you able to confirm that? Like, because it doesn't look like that. I guess my other question around that is that in keeping with the direction that would protect for future redevelopment of lands to the west, should that ever occur? What is the rationale for that setback?
The setback, we didn't start to say that, well, it has to be this kind of dimension. It was more of a it was more working backwards in terms of how the other aspects of the building worked, the structural grid, the parking grid, the module for the apartment units themselves. So it wasn't a hard and fast number that we tried to reach. It was just what resulted in the general desire to step the building back from that side.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Thank you.
Dana?
My questions have been answered. Thanks.
I don't have any further questions myself, so I'll turn it over to the panelists for their advice and commentary. First up is Ted.
Great, thank you. We appreciate the retention of the existing building to the north on James. I think that's a very positive contribution to the streetscape of the existing. Presuming that is adaptively reused and incorporated into this development. And we also appreciate the interest and response to context and character that's been expressed by the architect and the developer over yield. Very much appreciate that. We've been asked to address the vibrancy of the streetscape environment, and I suspect there's a desire on James Street to maintain the street line, but I question whether that is a value here, or to what extent, or are there variations along there that provide more relief at this corner site, to allow for greater activity and some relief from the streetscape. So I would suggest that might be considered. And then this is a corner site, and the streets take a bit of a chicane at this point, and so it's actually a very interesting dynamic in terms of movement and how you perceive that space. And there's a relief that's happening on that corner to start with. And my comment would be, it feels like the building coming down on the property line feels really tight, and should there be relief at the even more specifically at the corner of this massing, maybe that's just at grade, but it feels like it's a very tight corner for the pedestrian, and it feels like it could be more generous and more successful, given its prominence in terms of movement. And then from a massing perspective, it feels like the upper massing is very broad. Its proportions, are almost square in proportion, and it feels like they want to be slimmer, perhaps by stepping back or reducing the half of the mass to the west of this building, that it could actually achieve that. There is a recess, but the balconies actually come out and align with that face, so the end result is a feeling of basically a large kind of cube on this upper volume. And I think there could be some more slender and elegant proportions that could be, improve that upper massing. And then just to address the concept that's been put forward around heritage, and I'll maybe refer to the precedents that have been referenced. The Templar Flats is one that looks at the adjacent properties and develops a new facade in a modern interpretation of a traditional facade, and then places the modernity behind it, and it's very successful. And then the one at Queen and Bathurst is different. It takes the brick materiality, places it up higher throughout the entire building complex, but has a more open and modern base to it, which also seems to work extremely well. In this instance, where the first building is taken as the historic precedent, it's then being placed on this corner that actually doesn't have that scale and cadence. This is a much broader, longer building, very different, not only in character, but also in scale. So that's being recreated new as a traditional building, and then a modern version is coming through that traditional form. And we see that a lot with actual traditional buildings of that type. There's lots of instances here in Toronto that we've seen. My former office became that. But I'm just questioning that approach. The validity of both the scale, but also from a heritage perspective, does that make sense in terms of what is being referenced and the success of that? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you. So overall, I'm really happy to see the importance you've given to the public realm and the streetscape design by having it first in your presentation. So thank you for that. I also appreciate the efforts that you've gone to protect the existing street trees and providing those additional trees to fill in those gaps, as well as the flexible patio space you've given for the commercial uses at grade. I do think you really have an opportunity here to capitalize on that existing character of James Street further to the south and then extend it through this site. To that end, I think the development would really benefit further by matching that existing rhythm of the small separate retail units and entrances. I think this finer scale is going to really help build in more flexibility for the future and create that activity that we always want to see at grade. I'm also happy to see the retention of the existing building, similar to TED. However, I don't think the proposed new, as well as filling in that gap between the existing buildings here, but I don't think this new proposal as it is respecting the kind of continuous perceived massing that's intended for this area in terms of that street wall height and step back. I found it kind of a bit difficult also with the net shadow impact versus as of right. It's easier kind of when we see them all together to show that the difference between the two. But comparing the two and contrasting them, it looks like there might be some shading of the public realm happening along James Street, and that it may even have an impact on the park to the north, which should be mitigated if that is the case. To address kind of those concerns, I would suggest you consider maybe maintaining that existing street wall height of 2 to 3 stories, potentially allowing for more height at the corner to kind of give you more of a visual anchor at Barton and James Street and that interesting intersection that we have there, with step backs or the application of an angular plane to preserve that perception of massing along the street and continue that character. That should also help with the shadow impacts that may be impacting the public realm. For the rooftop amenity space, I think this is a really good location for great views of the bay and escarpment, as you've noted, given the proposed height that you put forward. And I do hope the design capitalizes on that if this height goes ahead. While I'm not strictly opposed to that height, I do think the building itself has to be better masked and more disguised from the street and overall provide a little bit more in terms of public amenity and the public realm than what you currently propose to kind of warrant doubling that permitted height, even though it is permitted through the official secondary plan. Some other elements that you might consider, given that you're meeting the current parking requirements, I'd rather see a reduction in the surface parking and more active or commercial frontages along Barton Street in particular. And there may be also potential for some at grade or above grade amenity spaces you alluded to in the rear in lieu of that current proposed surface parking. I do think overall you've brought forward a really interesting development, and I look forward to seeing the final design. So thank you very much.
Joey.
Thanks, David. Thank you for the presentation. As Jennifer noted earlier, it's hard to assess this project based on some missing information, but also in its response to heritage value without a heritage report. So with that said, I do question the removal of the International Hotel at 309 James, as it is on the heritage inventory and also considered a character defining resource for the area. I am also going to echo Ted's and Jen's concerns, but I will start by saying that I do admire Core Urban and Lintac's work. As I understand its project's objectives to be a direct response to particular historical contexts, and also aligning with its heritage qualities and elements through new design. And as Ted noted, this was very successful on King William with the Templar Flats. I am less convinced with this project on James Street. Again, as Ted noted, the Firth building precedent does not really work here. The precedent for this project is not a single building, but the entire James Street commercial strip, which has been identified as a cultural heritage landscape. I also disagree that there's less heritage character on this part of James. It's just more modest and subdued and more about the vernacular architecture. In this way, the new design is less responsive to the heritage character of this strip, except for maybe the Harbor Mission Heritage Building, which is one of the most prominent ones along the block, the one that's part of this site. However, ironically, the new building overwhelms this building and in some ways undermines its presence. I do recommend a reconsideration of the podium approach to consider the finer and grainier moments and qualities of the James Street buildings, as Jen had noted, and possibly include the retention and restoration of the former International Hotel. In support of Ted's comment, I recommend a reduction in footprint in the tower portion to pull away from James. And also, since this project is early in the design, I recommend that the panel see it again once it is more fully resolved, including more of the deliverables that we typically see. That's all for me. Thank you.
Jennifer Mallard.
Thanks. I want to echo Joey's comments and Jen's comments regarding scale and character and the approach to this particular site. But I do applaud the and appreciate the attention to detail, the materiality that's at the realm of interaction with human beings at the sidewalk level and brick and trees and paving and benches, et cetera, et cetera. I think Lintac and the developer have demonstrated a commitment to quality building, and I applaud that. I think, as Dana said or Jen said earlier, I'm not opposed to the height either, but I do feel that the tower massing needs to be refined a bit more. It seems that there are too many strategies and shifts in texture as you move around the building, and it gets particularly fragmented at the back. So I think some clarity there would help to define the tower more clearly against the base. Those are all my comments.
Eldon.
Eldon has a message in the chat that said he had to leave.
Okay, sorry. Dana.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to start from the base and then move to the tower and top. I felt looking at the base, there was some more opportunity for activation along the Barton Street frontage, particularly where you have kind of blank frontages along both sides of the parking garage. Excuse me, I question the need for 2 lobbies along the James Street frontage. It looks like that those lobbies will kind of take up about 1/3 of that frontage, and I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to kind of condense those down, or just have 1 lobby and more finer grain retail or commercial space along James Street. When it comes to the tower, I did have concerns with the tower setback from the property line. I know this is kind of on the cusp of between a mid-rise and a tall building, but I do think that a setback of greater than 3 meters is appropriate. I think you do need to do your part on your site to ensure there is development potential off-site, to ensure we don't end up with gaps in the street frontage along this street, and that we ensure that there's development potential off-site for a building of a similar height and stature. So as you move forward, please look closely at the interior side yard setbacks. I know for a tall building, the requirement's 12.5 meters in a lot of cases, but just ensuring what you're providing on your site provides opportunity for a similar redevelopment to happen off-site as well. And finally, for the top space, I think the amenity is great. I look forward to seeing how you guys detail that, ensuring there's a lot of different uses for different people in the buildings. But I think with these upper floor amenities, it's critical that you really pay attention to the wind study and the wind report, looking at the space and figuring out how it can be best designed to mitigate wind impacts that may impact the roof. Thanks very much. That's everything for me.
With Eldon's absence, I guess it's I will wrap up. I think I, in essence, agree with the majority of the panelists in terms of the issues with the heritage approach in this case. I think it's has been commendable in other circumstances, but maybe another revisit in this particular instance with something that's more inspired by the local street. The overall massing, I wonder if we had the benefit of the sort of angular plane setbacks and some of the other issues with the adjacent properties that have already raised, whether it wouldn't become pretty clear that the massing is a little too large on the footprint there. Even your own diagrams where you sort of analyzed it and sort of showed a step back on the west side, you then, when you finally divined it, you sort of filled that infill with balconies and whatnot, and so it's kind of lost the smaller scale that seemed to be implied in the earlier approach. I even had some questions about just how loading and garbage removal would be able to occur and maintain access to your parking and whatnot without sort of plugging it up there. So I think that there's a few things in terms of refinement, and I agree with the idea that maybe you can get rid of all of the parking on the grade and increase, through a number of strategies that have been mentioned, the amount of commercial or amenity space that is there. I agree with many of the other projects that you brought in front of us and have done in the city before. You've done excellent work, and I'm sure that with some more consideration on this one, you'll be able to do something equally commendable with further refinement. I don't know if you have any questions for us.
I don't have any.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, that will conclude our meeting today. Thanks for attending the design review panel. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.